Hey man, welcome back to Man Time. Today's episode, we're going to jump right into it. We're going to talk about cost benefit of rebuilding a chainsaw, and if you were looking to do this for a business, what are the odds that somebody would pay what the time and effort and parts that you put into it? Is it a viable business, and is it a good cost benefit for rebuilding chainsaws on a semi-professional level? Welcome to Man Time. I'm going to try to put up, a list of all the prices, steel prices and dealership versus your cost and aftermarket, the money that I have into this saw, right? So let's start off with steel prices, and we'll compare that to the aftermarket. First, piston and cylinder. If you're going to go to steel and get a piston and cylinder for this MS440, it's going to be right around $300. If you're going to go with the aftermarket parts that I went with, high-end Meteor Italian, $140. And then seals, bearings, kit for this. From steel, it's going to run you about $80. Aftermarket ran me about $40 from Dukes. For the crank, it was about $200 from steel, $60 from Dukes where I got mine. Again, nice forged crank. Threads were a little gummed up, but nothing terrible. Again, it's that's much less than half price. Now, as far as all of the rubber components, the fuel line, impulse, filter, all that stuff, just fuel filter, air filter was fine. I didn't have to replace that, but that was about $100, and I went with all OEM stuff on that, so it's $100 for me and $100, for them at the dealership. So total cost breakdown, if you're getting all your parts from steel, $680. Aftermarket with good, higher end stuff, $340. And so it's exactly half price, right, for steel parts versus aftermarket parts. And now, if you're going to try to do this professionally and sell these saws the way that I would recommend doing it, well, there's two different ways, right? You can either look for junky eBay saws, or somebody can send you their saw. We're just going to kind of stick to this one. A blown up saw with a bad crank needs completely gone through, right? Any saw of this age is pretty much going to need completely gone through. So that's the service I would be selling for this particular repair. It's going to be tough to price this out for somebody that wants to send you their saw to fix up, right? Because it's $80 for shipping one way. So there's $160 right there that person is sending you the saw back and forth. So I would say you have to go to eBay and find a junky saw to rebuild and then sell as a ported rebuilt saw. That's how I would approach it. And the eBay prices are ranging from $300 to $500 for a complete saw. Even $300 for an incomplete saw that's blown up in some cases. So the prices are ridiculous. So you got your $340 plus an additional $300 of what you're going to spend on actually finding a saw to do this rebuild process with. So right off the bat, you're $640, and then for me it took me 20 hours, but I also did the porting. I also really inspected and took my time with everything, and they may be able to do it cheaper like at the dealership. So let's say you have your saw that's blown up and you want to have it rebuilt at the dealership. I saw that most of the dealerships range between $80 and $100, maybe even more in some of the bigger cities for repairs like this. A lot of the steel dealerships won't even rebuild them, right? There's just too much time doing that, and they aren't gonna. They just refuse to do it. It's so hard to quote something that's blown up. That it's, again, if I were to do this, that's kind of what this is. They say that if you're doing what you love, you never have to work a day in your life. Well, if you're doing what you love, you have to make a living at it too, right? That's the other part of that equation. And so anyways, if it took me 20 hours, and if I charge $50 for my time, that's $1,000. And at the dealership, if they're just putting on, stock parts, unbolting it, bolting it back together, they're probably going to take about half that amount of time, 10 hours. But 10 hours at $100, it's $1,000 either way, right? So, total with the parts plus my time, $1,340 is what I came up with here. $340 for parts, $1,000 for labor, $1,340. But that's not including the eBay price of the saw. So then you're up to $1,640. So if I were to try to do this as a business and make, $50 an hour, and not only that, like, I'll go into like the really fine details in just a minute, but let's just talk about cost first, right? So $340 plus $1,000, $1,340 plus the cost of like the cheapest eBay saw, $1,640, and that's not always going to be available. But anyways, for the steel dealer, if you were to buy a junkie saw, take it to Stihl, and then have them redo it again, $1,000 plus $300 plus $680, you're looking at $1,980, and at that price, you're pretty much out of the game, and probably why they don't do it at the steel dealer. On the other hand, if you own the saw and you take it to a steel dealer, you're going to pay $1,680, which is like the price of a new 500i, right? The top of the line fuel injected steel chainsaw. So, at that point, it's just cheaper again to buy one off the shelf. But let's just talk about, first of all, who pays for a $1,700 chainsaw. Again, the Stihl 500i is a good example of like the top of the line $1,700 chainsaw. Who is actually buying those saws, right? Well, it's typically going to be like tree services. It's going to be enthusiasts that just, have money to burn on the best chainsaw. But let's just say the 500i person is like maybe the top 30% of like a tree service. And tree services, I'm thinking like there's about one tree service for every 20,000 people or somewhere's thereabouts. 332 million people in the U.S., so about 16,000 tree services. About 30% of those might get the 500i. That leaves a total of 11,620 that are going to actually pay that price. Now, fact-checking that, I went on Stihl's website and looked at reviews on the 500i. There's 27 reviews. So of these potential buyers of the saw, let's just call it 11,000, only 27 of those people have actually taken that survey. Reviews. It was the reviews section. First thing that popped up, $500, chance to win $500 if you leave a review. Right, so they're even incentivizing people to leave a review with $500, and still only 27 people did that. So it's pretty tough to get a gauge on who's actually going to pay for a $1,700 chainsaw. Now, the other side of that is who's going to pay for a $1,700 chainsaw that doesn't have all of the Stihl parts in it, right? Like the Chinese clones, that might be another option that somebody could go down. Is like, well, I'll just get a Chinese clone saw and like put some Stihl or OEM parts on it, and then sell that one at a premium. But the word Chinese is like a hushed word amongst men, right? Like, if somebody's running something and you come up to them and say, "Hey, man, that's a really good saw. Where'd you get it?" And then, if you like, what kind of saw is that? It sounds really good. They'll almost like lie about it, right? It's like, oh, it's an overseas saw. With some port work done to it, or it's a Asian saw or a European saw, right? It's like nobody wants to say it's a Chinese saw. So like that's almost out of the question. Try to get a premium, even if you've done the work and the time and the effort to put good parts into it and port work into it. Trying to get that amount of money out of it is not a viable option. Anyways. Let's see here. And if you're trying to make, let's say you're trying to make a good living at doing this, you can do that at about 8 hours a day times 50 hours, $50 an hour, 240 days. That's about $100,000 a year. But like with this saw, like it was weeks of downtime, like in between parts coming and going. So you'd have to have like 4 saws in process at all times. But it's about 96 saws per year, and out of the 1,100, there's already, or 11,000, there's already at least 10, 15, maybe 20 people out there doing the port work. And then there's videos like mine out there that show people how to do it themselves, you know, so you can basically do it yourself. It's a hard case to sell. You know, there's only, you know, 11,000 out there divided by 10 shops that are already doing it, you know, and then people that are doing it on their own. So maybe there's 1,000 saws out there for you to do, and at 96 saws, you know, you might have a business for a few years doing that, but eventually the saws and the people wanting to do it are going to run out. Yeah. So that's the whole breakdown, cost-benefit analysis of it. You might be able to make a business out of this for a few years, but eventually there's going to be something that's going to slow the process down, either availability of saws on eBay, or, you know, people just aren't going to pay that amount, and they're just going to be fine with a stock saw that's about the same price. So anyways, cost-benefit. But on the other hand, if you blow up your saw and you're willing to spend $340 and watch my video on rebuilding it, then, you know, you're coming out way ahead, because you can avoid the $1,700 cost of a 500i, or even the $1,200 cost of a comparable 70cc chainsaw that's new off the shelf, that isn't going to be as good or reliable because of the new computer auto-tune M-Tronic stuff that needs a computer to tell you why it's screwed up, right? And with the advent of all the aftermarket parts, even though they're coming from China, there's a cheap way to rebuild your saw with some aftermarket stuff. And some of it isn't coming from China, like Proline has a really good line of stuff. Dukes, Red Barn, like there is a bunch of companies out there. Wolf Creek, they're selling Taiwanese highway stuff, and then Meteor, of course, is kind of the higher end aftermarket, which is Italian. So I mean, you can put some good parts on there, rebuild it yourself, and come out way ahead. So, but yeah, I was thinking about trying to do this, you know, as a business professionally, and the numbers just don't seem to work out, you know. But I don't know. I may I may try to sell some of these saws at $1,700 a pop and see how it goes. Anywho, if you're willing to buy a $1,700 chainsaw rebuilt by somebody with meticulous, you know, going through and then showing the actual saw running, down there in the comments, let me know if that's something that you would be willing to entertain. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but that'll help people that are watching this video trying to decide. You know, the people down here might have an answer for you too. Anyways, that's going to do it for today on Man Time. Get out there, have you some man time too.